Hi, I'm Morgan McKinney, and I'm going to talk to you tonight about tuberculosis. Pulmonary tuberculosis is a communicable disease caused by a bacterium called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. It's actually one of the oldest diseases known to infect humans, and there's evidence of it in mummified remains and in written records dating as far back as 2700 BC. Today, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that over 30% of the world's population is infected with tuberculosis. It's the second leading cause of death attributed to a single infectious agent, with only HIV causing more deaths than tuberculosis. According to the World Health Organization, 8.7 million people worldwide had an active TB infection in 2011, and 1.4 million people died from TB in that year. In the United States, according to the CDC, there were over 10,000 cases of TB and 529 deaths. In West Virginia, according to the West Virginia Department of Health and Human Resources Bureau of Public Health, there were 13 cases and 1 death. So the disease is definitely on the decline in West Virginia and in the U.S., but worldwide it's still considered a very urgent public health threat. It is a reportable disease and is classified as a level 2 reportable disease, which means that once a diagnosis is made, it must be reported to the local health department and the Bureau of Public Health within 24 hours. Mycobacterium tuberculosis is a rod-shaped bacterium that is non-spore forming and aerobic. It's an acid-fast bacillus, and it has a very complex cell wall, which is part of the reason it can be so difficult to treat. The cell wall is a very strong lipid layer and does a good job with protecting the organism. It makes it highly virulent and contributes to the bacteria becoming resistant to antibiotics. Antibiotic-resistant forms of the disease are very hard to treat, and cases of these strains are actually on the rise, even though total numbers of cases are in decline worldwide. In the U.S., all types of tuberculosis are in decline. Tuberculosis is spread by respiratory droplets. It is coughed, sneezed, spoken, laughed, or sung into the air from an infected person's lungs, and it can live in the air for several hours. A person must breathe these droplets in to become infected with TB. It cannot be spread by inanimate objects. Close contact with someone with an active TB infection has a fairly high likelihood of exposure and infection. There are chances for the body to resist infections, starting with our mucociliary response. If a person breathes tuberculosis particles in, there is a chance that the cilia and the mucus in our respiratory tract would catch that disease, and it could be moved back up out of the respiratory tract and coughed out of the body, and no infection would occur at that point. If the bacteria make it to the lungs, then another immune response begins. The body sends macrophages to the site of the tuberculosis bacteria in an attempt to encapsulate the particles and prevent it from spreading to the rest of the body. As macrophages surround the tuberculosis particles, a nodular lesion is formed to contain the bacteria. This lesion is called a granuloma. If a person has a weakened immune system, the bacteria may spread throughout the lungs and cause an active infection without a granuloma successfully forming. Someone with a healthy immune response may develop latent TB, which is where the body successfully contains the tuberculosis particles inside of a granuloma, and it does not spread throughout the rest of the lungs. That person, however, could develop active tuberculosis later in life if they become immune compromised by another condition. Then that granuloma weakens and can let the TB particles out of the granuloma and cause an active infection. This process, this immune response, takes anywhere from 2 to 12 weeks, and it is this immune response that can cause the person to have a positive tuberculin skin test. TB can also be noted on a chest x-ray where you can see the granulomas that have formed around the tuberculosis particles. The lungs are the most common place for TB granulomas to form, but they have been found in other parts of the body, such as the kidneys or the brain. TB spreads very easily, and since many who are infected don't know they're infected for weeks or months, then they could infect up to 10 to 15 people over the course of a year before they begin treatment. The symptoms of an active TB infection include fatigue, weight loss, fever, and an initially non-productive cough. Diagnosis may not occur at this stage because there may not be enough tuberculosis particles in the sputum to cause a positive test, and the body's immune responses may not have initiated enough of a response to cause a positive tuberculin skin test. But during this stage, the person is actively infected and contagious. As the disease progresses, the cough becomes productive with thick secretions that are often bloodstream. Night sweats and anemia are common in late active tuberculosis, and at this point, all tests for tuberculosis would be positive. It can be detected by a tuberculin skin test, a blood test, or a sputum culture, and chest x-rays are very helpful in diagnosing tuberculosis, where you can see the granulomas that have formed. Populations that are at risk for TB include those with compromised immune systems, especially those with HIV, people who live in crowded conditions, such as prisons and homeless shelters, where the disease can be easily spread, and anyone who lives in poor or urban areas, especially in developing countries, is considered at risk for tuberculosis. Any healthcare worker that works with these populations is also considered at risk for tuberculosis. TB is, the link with HIV is especially strong. TB is an opportunistic disease, and once someone with HIV is exposed to tuberculosis, it's likely that they will be infected. The World Health Organization reports that 1/3 of people with HIV are also infected with tuberculosis. And 1/4 of all HIV deaths are caused by tuberculosis infections. TB is generally a curable disease. Treatment consists of 4 first-line antibiotics that are given in combination with each other, and these are isoniazid, rifampin, ethambutol, and pyrazinamide. The CDC has a preferred treatment regimen and 2 alternative regimens that include all 4 antibiotics in combination for a minimum of 6 months. If the infection is latent, treatment is longer, usually about 9 months, but treatment can last up to 2 years. Properly treated tuberculosis will very likely be cured in healthy individuals. Due to improper or poorly implemented treatment regimens over the years, several resistant strains of tuberculosis have developed. Some strains of TB are resistant only to one of the first-line antibiotics, and sometimes these cases can be successfully treated with the three other antibiotics in combination. If the strain is resistant to 2 of the first-line antibiotics, this is called multi-drug resistant TB, or MDR-TB, and it can be more difficult to treat. If the strain is resistant to more than 2 of the first-line antibiotics, it's considered extensively drug-resistant, or XDR, tuberculosis. The cure rate for multi-drug resistant TB is only about 50 to 60%, even with proper treatment and follow-up. And extensively drug-resistant tuberculosis has a very high mortality rate, though I wasn't able to find specific numbers on that mortality rate. The preferred treatment for tuberculosis in countries with a high infection rate is directly observed therapy, or DOT. This involves a nurse or community health worker directly observing the patient, taking their antibiotics for the full course of the treatment. And this occurs sometimes in clinics, and often it occurs in the patient's home. And this improves the cure rate and helps lessen the chance of that person developing a resistant strain of tuberculosis. So nurses really can play a vital role in tuberculosis prevention and treatment. Tuberculosis most often affects those with weakened immune systems who are malnourished or otherwise ill. So promoting exercise and good nutrition and regular checkups is an important part of primary prevention that nurses can help with. Being aware of at-risk populations is vital to stopping the spread of tuberculosis, with nurses being able to emphasize screening for anyone who is at risk as a secondary nursing intervention. Tertiary interventions include educating infected persons on the importance of following through with their treatment and taking all of their antibiotics for the full course, which highly increases cure rates. Nurses should also be sure that proper infection control measures are in place, and TB requires respiratory droplet precautions. For a patient hospitalized with tuberculosis, a negative pressure isolation room is important, and if the person is on a ventilator, then a bacterial filter should be in place on the outflow. Also, in infected persons, it's important to educate the person's loved ones and family members on how tuberculosis is spread and the importance of supporting this person through the full course of their treatment. So, to summarize, tuberculosis is a very serious disease, but with proper treatment, it is curable. It's currently one of the most prevalent infectious diseases in the world. It spreads easily, can be difficult to diagnose, and treatment is long and complicated. Nurses can play a vital role in educating themselves and the public about tuberculosis by encouraging screening for at-risk populations, working to ensure that patients follow through with their treatment. Full courses of proper treatment are absolutely necessary to help stop the growing numbers of people infected with antibiotic-resistant strains of tuberculosis. Nurses have the knowledge and the skill to participate in all levels of prevention and intervention strategies for this disease.